Hello, everyone that I can see, and I hope you're having a good day. I'm speaking to you from the Netherlands, and I will talk to you today about cloud migrations. So let me share my screen. I think it's this one. Yeah. All right. So what will I talk about today? First, about me a little. My name is Piet van Dongen. I'm a cloud consultant and sometimes senior software engineer at a company called Luminis in the Netherlands. And I co-wrote a white paper on cloud migrations, which you can download at this URL. You have to leave your email address number, but if you don't want me to call you back, I won't. But it's a fun read after this talk, I think. And the illustrations you see here are made by Joost Verbij. He also made the illustrations for the white paper. And I have to prep him up because I really like the demonstrations. Okay, so what will I talk about today in the next about 30 minutes? First, I'm going to do a bit about how to prepare for a cloud migration. I'll talk about what the cloud is, what the advantages and the disadvantages are of a cloud migration and a cloud transformation. Then I will tell you about how to do the actual migration itself, so how you get from your data center to the cloud. And I will talk a little bit about how you finish your cloud migration and what you can expect after having migrated all your applications to the cloud. And afterwards, you can ask me questions and I will answer them. You can also type your questions and comments in the chat, which I can see, and then I will answer them later. Okay, so the scope of this talk, that's important, I think. It's about mass migration. So that's migrating a lot of applications. It's not about migrating one or two applications or systems. It's about a mass migration. It's also about migrating custom applications. So not off-the-shelf software that you bought and you want to migrate from on-prem running to the cloud. For that, you probably have SaaS software. This is about custom software and configurations. And it's about migrating systems, not infrastructure. So migrating database, for example, is part of the scope of migration, but there are applications attached to them. It's not just about migrating loose systems. And it's about migrating and not transforming, because a cloud migration alone won't have you gain much if you don't do a cloud transformation afterward. So that's the scope of this talk. It's not platform specific. It's not AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud specific or another cloud. And it's not just aimed at developers. It's aimed at the whole DevOps team, plus the ones they're working with together, plus management, plus anyone that is involved in migrating to the cloud. I wanted to do this metaphor, but we can't do anything live. I had this super fun idea, I think, where I would drag an elephant to the stage and it would be backstage and would pretend that I would eat it, but we don't have a live talk right now. So I chose a different metaphor because I think that helps in imagining what a cloud migration looks like. So let's say, for example, you're here and you want to go there. What you normally would do is just draw a line from O to X and then just go there in a straight line, which is fine until you bump into something. In this case, a sea monster, but during actual migrations, there's probably something that you didn't think about beforehand, which you will encounter. But that's okay, because you can circumvent it, you can go around it until you hit something else, which you can navigate around as well until you're almost finished. And that's circumventable as well until you finish your migration. So this is what cloud migrations actually look like in real life. You can plan ahead, but you shouldn't do too much because there's always pirates and icebergs ahead, which you can't predict beforehand. Okay, so how do you prepare for a cloud migration then? First, let me talk about the advantages of the cloud. and a logo overkill I now see. Okay, so this is from the State of DevOps report. So in the State of DevOps report, they put companies in 4 categories. You have the low performers, the medium performers, the high performers, and the elite. And the elite tends to use cloud technology, is 24 times as likely to use cloud technology than the low performers. And the difference between these two is that elite companies, so the cloud users, they can deploy on demand. So if there's something that needs to be deployed, anyone can do it anytime. Whereas low performers, they can deploy once or twice a year. A lead time for change, so the time between an idea and the idea going into production, is somewhere between not now immediately and a day for performers, and between 1 to 6 months for low performers. So there's a long lead time to get something that you thought of into production. If it goes wrong, so if something breaks, the elite fix it within the hour. So within the hour, the service is back online. And low performance can sometimes take weeks, or on average, they take 1 to 5 weeks to fix bugs. And the introduction of new software leads to no or 15%, up until 15% failure for elite performers. But for low performers, this can be half of what they introduce can be bug ridden. So if you combine this with the deployment frequency, the time to restore service, then you can see there's a huge gap between low performing companies that tend to use the cloud much less and elite companies that are 24 times as likely to use cloud technology. So this is, I think, a very powerful image on why you should use cloud technology. Other benefits are better cost estimates. Cloud companies are much more likely to correctly estimate what something will cost and what part of their system costs what. They're also more likely to stay below budget. Their employees are generally more healthy and more happy. So these are arguments, once again, to pick cloud technology. Okay, so what is the cloud then? Because if you ask 4 people what they think the cloud is, you get 4 different answers. So let me clarify what I mean by the cloud. I don't mean a computer at the other end of the internet. So this sticker was funny maybe years ago, but that's not what the cloud is anymore. Oh, the order is wrong. Anyways, so what I mean by the cloud, I picked from the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the USA. They have defined the cloud as having 5 properties. And the first one is that the cloud has to have on-demand self-serve. So employees should be able to provision resources themselves without any human interaction, so they can save time for creative work. Broad network access, so the cloud should be accessible by phone, desktop, tablet, workstation, from home, from the Starbucks, from any coffee shop or your friend or your family. So you should be able to work from anywhere. Resource pooling means that you don't have to think about physical details like servers or networks or storage or compute, but you have you can think about cloud as something that's available, something that you just can use, and it's infinitely scalable. And costs are predictable and low. It's rapidly elastic, meaning that you can automatically scale up and down with virtually no ceiling or bottom. And lastly, everything is measured. So actual usage is always visible, and you can control your costs that way. So that's why I said that cloud companies tend to be likely to see what their costs are and what part of the system costs what. And this is the part of the cloud that I'm defining now that enables that. So this is, for me, in this talk, the cloud. And something else that I find really important to drive home is that you shouldn't use the cloud just as a technology. It's not a new Java or JavaScript or .NET platform. It's a whole new way of thinking about business to enable your customers to get their job done. So a customer has done. He wants to be, now, for example, if he buys a skateboard from you, the customer is not buying wheels. She's not buying a deck and a couple of nuts and screws. But what she is or he is doing is this, buying a cooler or better version of themselves. That's what they want to do. So cloud technology is excellent in getting your customer to get their job done, because you can hyper focus your business on what your customer needs and wants, and you can build it really quickly, which also means you can, if it doesn't work, you can undeploy it really quickly and try new stuff. And you can do it really quickly, so your time to value, as they call it, can be really short. And because you are quick and the costs are very manageable, you're also really agile. So these two, time to value, agility, these are the things that cloud ultimately enables, like no technology does, is my opinion. Okay, so how do you migrate to the cloud then? So you have your stuff in your data center, you want to go to a cloud provider or a cloud platform. So what's important is that you pick the right crew. At the beginning, you will have to do a lot of exploring and failing, creative work. So you have to make sure you have people that know how to do this, that trust each other, that can fail safely without doing any harm or having the idea that any harm is done. And this will kickstart your cloud transformation. Then you need to have a scaling strategy. So for example, how will you share new knowledge, or how will you make sure the rest of the organization can join the cloud migration later on? So for that, there are some things that work, some things that don't work as well. For example, communities of practice do work well, and grassroots efforts do work well. What doesn't work as well is, for example, a center of excellence. So bottom up, organic knowledge exchange generally works much better than top down. What you also need to have is a platform team, a dedicated team that builds your platform and your tooling so that your developers are enabled to build. So your developers do need to think like networks, but not all the time. And what's generally the best is that your platform team builds the tools that your teams, your development teams, can use to build their applications. And lastly, if you're doing a cloud migration, what really helps is to have a team of experts that kickstart the migration and will help teams later on. So for example, a consultancy company, we do that all the time. We help companies kickstart their migration by being available for them, having a team ready. So when they have problems, or when they want to go fast, or when they want to do anything, we can help them. Okay, so I have an example from one of our clients, one of the projects we did. So what we did there, the platform team I just talked about, the ones that built the platform for the teams to build their software, their solutions on, consistent of the client's people plus some consultants. So that really kickstarted the building of the platform, because we had a lot of experience. We could transfer the knowledge we had to the client and slowly back out. What we also did was put a migration team in the middle of the IT organization. So we were available for help. We could build proof of concept. We could write manuals, do presentations, encourage people to start learning cloud. And that really helped kickstart this migration, because there was a lot of inertia in the beginning, which is always anywhere inertia when you're doing something new. But this can help overcome that, and it did in this case. And the development teams were all client teams. So they eventually did the cloud migrations themselves. So this means that you have less bottlenecks, because the consultancy company widened this bottleneck. Well, what we also saw was that the platforms team dictated the speed of the development team. So what's important here is that your platform team runs ahead of the crowd. So it has to build a platform, preferably the tools before the development teams, use them, so they don't have to wait for it. Because anytime you wait for something to be done, you get a slowdown of your migration. Okay, so how do you plan the migration then? So how do you map out the migration? The most important thing, especially for leadership, is to start with why. So why should your organization move to the cloud? Think about back to the slide about with the skateboard. So what is the job to be done? How do you want to ultimately help your customer ever better? And how will the cloud help you do this? So where is the cloud gold? If you get this right, you can internally motivate your people to get going, to get moving to the cloud. So you should share your ideas and discuss them widely. You have to have a lot of support. Then you have to assess what you have. So how many applications and systems do you have? How big a ship do you need to migrate all this to the cloud? Once you know these two, you have these two. So you have motivation, you have an assessment of what you have. You can plan the migration coarsely. So you can create milestones. For example, we want to finish this by next year. You can coarsely plan the course, not too fine, because there's always pirates and icebergs and giant octopuses, but you can plan coarsely. So you can plan the direction in which you're going. How many applications do we want to do when, roughly, and what type of applications, for example. And once you know that, you can create blueprints. So you have groups of applications that are very similar, very alike, systems that are very heterogeneous, and you can create strategies to migrate them. Think about the why here too. So why do you want to go to the cloud? So if you, for example, want to help your customers more quickly, then which applications should migrate first and which last? I'll get back to that later. And then you have to start migrating. So you start small with adventurous teams, because this is a wobbly phase. And then bit by bit, you'll get to learn how to migrate, how to use cloud technology, how to go to production, how to share your knowledge. So again, an example from my practice. What we did in the assessment phase was assess which applications were connected to databases, services, other applications, by which protocols, how many were connected to how many. And that we mapped out into a visualization. This is something we built. And this enabled the client to see which applications were complex. For example, the large ones, which means a lot of lines of code, lots of complexity, were heavily connected to others. So that probably means you shouldn't migrate them first. You should probably start at the edges, for example. And at the end, you can peel off all these dependencies and bit by bit get to migrating that last big one. There are other strategies for that as well, which I'll get to later. So this is something that you could do to assess your client's application landscape. Okay, so you start migrating and you've migrated something. You wanted to get to create your first successful migration. So how do you do this? You have to start small. For example, you get one team to start with migrating. You migrate a not too complex application. The complex stuff can be done later, and you can do parts in a virtual sandbox. So this enables you to get a feel for how the cloud technology works for your organization. Then in the beginning, creativity is more important than efficiency or stableness. So aim for creative work, creative people, creative teams, small teams, psychological safety, like I mentioned before, broad views, not people that are only familiar with a single technology, for example, or people that are not willing to do something new. And you have to get people to start learning or yearning, I prefer, for cloud technology. So you can build a platform and build the tooling that your teams will need later on. And the most important thing, I think, is production. So you are actually doing the migration, and you will learn stuff that you won't see in sandboxes. So you can start off in a sandbox to build part of your platform to get a feel for the cloud, but you have to aim for production very early in the process, because in production, things happen you cannot predict, and you have to learn to be able to migrate the rest of the applications. The nightmare scenario is that you do a big bang where you migrate everything without going live, then switching over to your new cloud environment, and then everything going to bits. So you have to start small, aim for production, be creative. Okay, about speeding up. So how do you get faster? What you need to know, what any project manager knows, is that the estimation you have on how long it will take will be very coarse in the beginning. So over time, you will get a feeling for how fast you can go. So the process in the beginning, and gradually get a feel for how much speed you are picking up. If there's too little speed, then you can always try to mitigate this, or put more resources into it, be more efficient, be more effective. But you have to, in the beginning, have to wait a bit about seeing where you will end up. Okay, another thing to keep in mind is that throughput and batch size are related. So if you're doing if you're doing lots of migrations simultaneously, your throughput will decrease. So my advice is to aim for production with small bits and pieces, and once you're done with that part of your migration, go back, pick another one, put it into the cloud, all the way into production, then do another one. Don't do 10 systems at a time, because then your throughput will decrease immensely, which will increase the time you will need to migrate successfully. So people that are familiar with Lean, this means that you have to limit your work in progress. Okay, the last thing that's important is that risk and frequency of delivery are related. So the more frequently you deploy, the better you get at it. So that's why I always say, do small stuff, aim for production, do it a lot, do it often, because then your risk that something goes wrong will decrease, because you start learning how this new technology, this new environment works. And the process is around them too. About risk, if you do a migration where you only go into production at the end, you do a big bang, then you're building up risk all the way until you go live. You won't know if your investment pay off until you're in production. So if you production often, you take some risk, could still go wrong in production. But once you are in production with that bit of your environment, with that bit of your landscape, you will know what the risk was. And if it didn't succeed, then you have taken some risk and you have failed somewhat, but the rest you can still do better. And the smaller your iterations, the less risk you build up, the less speculation you do. So try to use agile methods to do the DevOps way of working, to instill this culture and keep risk low and agility high. Okay, so now you're getting up to speed, you're doing your migration, everything is going better and better. So how do you keep track of the whole migration? So you have to evaluate constantly if you're still on track, where you are in your migration. You can do this by looking ahead, so you can extrapolate by looking at the historical data that you've collected and extrapolate how long it will take if you continue like this. And this way you can avoid having to stop or slow down by being proactive. You have to maintain support. So the why I talked about earlier, you have to keep repeating. Make sure everyone is still involved, supports the plan. If they don't, ask them what's wrong, talk about it, and try to maintain this support you're building up for this new way of working. Do demos, do talks, give a party if it's permitted again, give motivational speeches, send presents, that kind of stuff. And important here is to be transparent. So you have to make sure everyone that's involved has access to all the information so they can take decisions if necessary. you have to share what went well. So if some team has successfully migrated a huge application or a complex one, or their first one, or have used some new technology that everyone is excited about, you have to share this. So you have to make very visible what's going well or what isn't going so well, so you can see the progress. If you're in the middle of the ocean, it's hard to see if you're going forward or backward, if you're going fast or slow. So you have to be as transparent as possible and share what you know. An example of this from a client of ours is where I built a tool that visualized where migrations for teams were. This is not actual data, but it's very alike. So we had a few teams there, 5 or 6, and they had their own colors, and they had a huge amount of applications that they had to migrate. So at the beginning of the migration, everyone was at the starting line at the left. You couldn't see which was which, but gradually, when teams picked up speed, you could see the runners, in this case, going from start through these migration phases we defined to the finish. The green bar is migrated, the black bar, the gray bar at the right is applications that didn't need to be migrated. Because what you will always see is that there are always some applications, most of the time between 10 and 20%, which is huge, that don't need to be migrated because they are either old, they can be migrated to other applications, merged, or they can be replaced by software as a service types of applications. Okay, now let's say you're almost done. You have migrated this huge field, but there are still some, remember the big application in the middle of the assessment that had a lot of connections that still need to be migrated, for example, or some very exotic system that you didn't have a plan for, or something that takes huge resources that you have a special IBM rack, which costs a lot of money for. How do you migrate these? So the important thing here is that you have to finish your migration because then you can close your project, close the data center, and go on with the rest of the transformation. So if necessary, you can lift and shift your applications. You can take them from your data center, find something in the cloud that's very similar. For example, in AWS, you have a huge EC2 servers that you could use, which are very similar to hardware, and you can migrate them to there. But you have to remember that doing this will create technical debt because you have to migrate those servers probably later on, because migrate to the cloud in a very similar way that you are running applications on-prem will be very cost effective. The last mile is the longest, or the kilometer in the Netherlands. So you have to finish. It's not over until everything is in production. Anyone that has done projects knows this is a hard one. And the technical debt I just talked about, you have to at least be sure that you've written down what you still have to do. If you have a backlog, put it on there, and then later, when the migration is done, start from the top of the backlog. Okay, so again, from the trenches, what we an example from something that was noteworthy was that during the migration, we thought that we agreed that speed was more important than correctness, or at least than beauty. So we encouraged the platform team and the teams to get started, get the train going, and trust the system, the process. So teams, what you saw was that this pressure created a much more quicker and smoother transformation, or migration, than if we would have said that teams didn't have that tight a deadline, or that we didn't plan much ahead, or that speed wasn't important. Okay. So now you've migrated. What's next? Okay, so again, migrating to the cloud should not be the goal, because if you're just doing a technical migration, you won't have that skateboarder pipe dream that you had done. You should aim for a cloud transformation. I can talk about this, but I also can show you with a short clip. So you migrate to the cloud, you have a very, very powerful platform, but you need to learn how to use it, because otherwise your cloud transformation will fail. So a migration alone is a start of a much bigger transformation of your organization. You need to organize around this new speed, agility, and powerful stuff you've just enabled yourself to use. One KPI that I really like here is, because it's customer focused, is aiming for the shortest possible time to value. So if you're doing internal KPIs, then you're not aiming for you're not helping your customers. So this one, short time to value, means that your whole pipeline, from business idea to getting that into production, if you focus on shortening that, then you will see everything will move around getting this better. So you will learn how to use this technology to help your customer. That means that teams will have to work together better, that roles will have to be integrated into the team, that you have these T-shaped people that are generalist but also very specialist in one way work together, that communication will become better, that you will share your knowledge more broadly, that kind of stuff. So the DevOps dream. So you have to go from a technical migration to an organizational change. One way to do this is what I'd like to advise companies is to start with a challenge. For example, what I mentioned at the beginning, that cloud companies are more able to predict and identify costs. One way to challenge teams is to say, okay, so your part of our landscape costs this much per month. Now try to reduce that cost by 10% or 5%. It doesn't matter. Or don't let it go up in a year. And what you will see is that people will do a lot of stuff to get a grip on this new technology they have, and understand that they have a lot of abilities to, for example, help their customers better, drive their costs down, be more effective with their work, and get used to new tools. So, in summary, you have to start with why. This is really important. Leadership has to go all in on this migration. They have to explain why they want to do this, and they have to motivate everyone to do it. And they have to be involved during the whole process and afterwards. So you have to make a plan. How do you migrate from A to Z? Not too fine, just course. Remember, you have these pirate ships and icebergs. Make a general plan. Then start with a small creative team with people that know how to fail and get up again and go on, and then gradually scale up. So gradually involve more teams, gradually share knowledge, and gain speed. Make sure that everything you've learned, that you share this with your whole organization. So give them a platform to share knowledge, and encourage everyone to join in. So not just the technical teams, but also the managers, the product owners, the table with the CIOs, CAOs, and CTOs, the customers themselves, roles like testers, if they are part of the team already. Everyone should be in on this migration, because enabling, embracing this power that the cloud has means that everyone needs to learn how to use it. Which means you're beginning your cloud transformation, which was not the focus scope of this talk, but it's important because that's what you are starting when you're doing a migration. If you're forgetting the transformation, you're going to have a data center at the other end of the internet, which is not what the cloud is about. Okay. I always like metaphors to enable people to do better work. And this is used by anyone these days, but from the Le Petit Prince is about how to motivate people, for example, to cross the ocean. You don't just say, well, here's how to build a ship, here's how to sail it, but what you do is you motivate them to get to the other end of it. This is the actual quote, by the way. The other one is used a lot. This is the actual quote, but the important thing here is that you need to motivate your people by having them imagine what power the cloud gives you. And if you do this well, you will see that people get self-motivated to do the migration better. So you have to do it as a whole, as a collective. And one way to do that is to use this imaginary exercise to do it. Okay, so thank you for your attention, people I can see on the other end of the internet. If you want to read more about cloud migrations, you can go to lumen.is/cloud migration. And I would like to see who's on Twitter interested in this, so we can tweet at each other about cloud transformations and migrations. If you have any questions, there's a delay between what I'm saying and what you're seeing, so I will just sit here, sip tea, and see if there's any questions in the chat. All right, no questions. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice day at the conference. Goodbye.